1968 it was one of those years, at least for me, that I knew it was an important year when I was in it.
Born to be Wild was the 68 anthem. It's all about the new freedom, and there's an element of danger to it. And it was by Steppenwolf, and Steppenwolf was the Herman Hesse novel that everyone was reading.
It was great in those days. You could turn on the radio and just hear great music, just at a flick of a dial.
The joining of the student with the all-powerful unions changed French society there and then, almost overnight. The country stopped working.
It was this exciting moment when people said, this is the America we want, this is the president we want.
It was the year that Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were assassinated.
We as a people will get to the promised land.
This was a real moment where Europeans in general went, wow, this is really intense what's happening in America.
Even when you're a young kid, you kind of know this is a pivotal year.
The start of 1968 brought new and unexplored worlds into people's homes, with the debut of Jacques Cousteau's The Undersea World. This was a lyrical contrast to how the year would unfold.
Today we begin one of our most important assignments, to trace the migrations of various shark species.
The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau was the thing that introduced everyone to this incredible underwater life.
This documentary really changed a lot of the ideas about documentaries because we could actually go underneath the water.
It felt quite psychedelic. I don't think that was the intention as such, but it felt like it was all part of this incredible decade. You know, a sort of decade of discovery, I suppose.
When they weren't under the sea looking at fabulous fish, they were on the yacht and they were drinking wine and eating baguettes. And so you see the beginning of falling in love with French culture.
There was an awful lot of red wine being drunk. And best of all, there was Jacques Cousteau's son, Philippe. He would often be found playing an acoustic guitar in as Gallic a manner as you could possibly imagine.
Really, in 1968, it was a fun time, it was an exciting time, but yachts really weren't that popular. But after this fantastic series, people wanted a yacht, and that's what the super rich started buying.
New forms of subversive comedy were also being explored on American television.
Hi, Big Dick here.
Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Now, that was a comedy sketch show. We never heard of these two comics. These guys were making jokes off each other, except the notch-up was Goldie Hawn. She was just bonkers.
Dan Rowan, I'd like you to meet Goldie Hawn.
No. I've met you before, you remember.
I know.
Yes,
I felt, watching it, that the counterculture had started to infect mainstream America.
Even Richard Nixon realised the positive aspects of appearing on it.
Sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me, sock it to me.
Sock it to yourself.
Sock it to me?
Obviously, being Richard Nixon, he wasn't particularly hilarious, but the notion of Richard Nixon saying, sock it to me, was almost unheard of.
Open up your eyes, then you realize. January of 1968 also signaled a turning point in the Vietnam War.
The Tet Offensive was launched by the Viet Cong to coincide with Tet, which was the Vietnamese New Year.
I mean, this goes back for years, for centuries. This is the time when you have an offensive. Americans had no idea.
The idea of the Tet Offensive was to put 67,000 troops and not just go for the countryside where they were strong, but attacked provincial capitals and major cities such as Saigon. Now, Saigon, of course, was where the bulk of the American press were stationed. It was the first time that the Vietnamese War had come to the press.
It was in our living room at 6:30 and 6 o'clock every evening. We began to see that war was a complicated thing. We started to see that maybe we were the bad guys here. And being an American, that was a weird place to be.
The most pivotal moment in the American perception of the Vietnam War came when Walter Cronkite said on CBS, "We're not going to win this war."
Walter Cronkite was so revered and trusted and, just this sort of father figure from so many Americans, that to hear this coming from him really rattled everything.
Almost overnight, you see perceptions changing. You see people saying, "Bring our boys back home. It's not going to work. We have to get out of these overseas wars."
And when I see the sign that points one way, the lot we used to pass by every day.
Walk Away Renee by the Four Tops has got the wonderful vocal talents of Levi Stubbs, and you've got this great spirit of the song. It's a kind of haunting, broken-hearted ballad with this very rich production.
In many ways, they were groundbreaking. Levi Stubbs was starting to mix bits of Bob Dylan's arc in the way he sang into soul. So to have a black man actually sing this way was quite revolutionary.
In America, the civil rights movement was reaching a climax with the Memphis sanitation strike.
In February, the sanitation workers in Memphis, a pretty tough and difficult job, they realized they were being paid much less than their white counterparts. So it took the decision to go out on strike.
Black men were called boy. That was just routine. So to stand up and make a sign that said, "I am a man," was a provocation, a statement, a stance of immense importance and power. Because then they could have been arrested for civil disorder. If they had gone into jail in Memphis, Tennessee, who knows what would have happened to them. They wouldn't have gotten any justice, that's for sure.
It was all about saying, "I'm a man, I should be treated as one." And so that's where it came from, and it manifested in big movement, and it became a student movement, and it became a sort of national concern.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
In the spring of 1968, Robert Kennedy entered the race for president, and that was a thrilling moment. Lyndon Johnson had stood down. He said he wasn't going to run. Lyndon, unfortunately, was seen as the old world, but Bobby was young and new, and young people loved him.
For me, growing up as a black girl, the Kennedy name had all that magic. JFK had done a lot to help, especially, and Bobby especially, had done a lot to help Martin Luther King.
He was really saying extraordinarily clear-eyed, progressive things in that campaign.
It was this exciting moment when people said, "This is the America we want, this is the president we want," and he's forward-looking, and it's about rights, and it's also about getting out of the war.
Ouais, il faut que tu me comprennes. Je suis en train d'essayer quelque chose. Il faut que tu me comprennes à demi-mot.
Le Biche, a film by Claude Chabrol, was part of the French New Wave, which also featured Godard and Truffaut. On the surface, it was a film about a lesbian relationship, but in fact, it was meant to represent a lot of the political undertows of what were going on at the time, particularly in France too. It was about power, it was about buying people, and it was about manipulation.
Come on within. You will not see nothing like the mighty wind.
Mighty Quinn, that was a fascinating process. I think Albert Grossman, Dylan's manager, was frustrated because Dylan had hurt himself in a motorcycle accident. And he wasn't working. He wasn't touring. There was no income. Hey, Bob, give me some songs. Let me sell some songs. And this demo, this LP, arrived at Feldman's Music in Charing Cross Road.
Come on without, come on within.
Everybody was queuing up to hear the Dylan demo. And out of that demo came Manfred Mann, Mighty Quinn. Oh, I mean, there were such great songs. And such, I mean, it was just an amazing thing. You know, when you hadn't heard any new Dylan for so long, and all of a sudden, boom.
22nd of March 1968 were the first rumblings of what would then become very famous May 68 Paris riots.
The Paris University of Nanterre, this is in the suburbs, and some very far left groups, they decide to have a meeting, and a lot of students participate in that, and there are two things they're looking at. Number one, it's discrimination in French society, which is rife, and number two, it's also the political bureaucracy that controls the university and its funding. It's felt to be incredibly unfair. And it's a peaceful meeting, it's a discussion meeting, but unfortunately, the university authorities cracked down too hard.
When they sent the police in to break up these rather cross students, then there was, in response, a demonstration. This took place on the 22nd of March.
It became known as the movement of 22nd of March, and it was the beginnings of the student uprisings in Paris.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
2001: A Space Odyssey was Stanley Kubrick's version of the Arthur C. Clarke novella. And it was quite an incomprehensible film, I think it's fair to say.
It's such a strange film, and it's such an unusual blockbuster. You know, you've got this three-part film, which is about the birth of man, and then the ascent of man in space, and then this kind of heavenly sequence at the end.
It was profound because of the music, the cinematography, and the threat that our machines were becoming bigger than us.
Rudi Dutschke had been named public enemy by the Springer press organisation. Outraged students demonstrated in his defence outside the building. This grew into a huge revolt against the German government.
Sitting in the morning sun, I'll be sitting.
At the start of April, civil rights leader Martin Luther King visited Memphis to lend support to the striking sanitation workers.
On April the 3rd, he made his famous "I have been to the mountaintop" speech, which was saying that if I have to die, you know, he said everyone wants longevity in life, but if I have to die because of speaking out, then I know that I've seen a better tomorrow. Really beautiful, powerful speech.
Because I've been to the mountaintop, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
And on April the 4th, on the walkway outside his room, Martin Luther King was shot by James L. Ray.
This was, I think, a real moment where the British and and Europeans in general went, wow, this is really intense, what's happening in America.
I had a transistor radio that I carried around all the time, and it came across on the radio that he had been assassinated. You know, it's not possible to describe what it was like. Bobby Kennedy, I had to announce it to a group of black people who had come to hear him speak. He gave them that announcement. I remember the way they sounded when he told them.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that
Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
When Martin Luther King died, unsurprisingly, there were riots in cities across America. And James Brown was booked to play the Boston Garden, and there's a lot of talk about whether he should go on, and he decided that he should, and actually it became a kind of peacekeeping mission.
James Brown, sensing the moment, realising that people were watching on television rather than going out rioting, he calmed the situation down.
Can't y'all go back down and let's do the show together? We're black. Don't make us all look bad. Let me finish doing the show. Come off the stage.
The result of this was that there was less crime in Boston than on a standard Saturday evening. People had actually stayed at home to watch James Brown.
Boy, this is really nice.
May 68, the Paris riots. This was a turning point, not just in sort of student relations, but in French culture. It was so big that de Gaulle actually secretly left the country for a while.
After the University of Nanterre is closed, the closures spread, and by this point the Sorbonne is closed. And the students are furious. The students protest the closure of the Sorbonne. 20,000 of them are outside, along with lecturers and supporters, and the demonstration is very badly handled. There starts to be a lot of support for the student. Public opinion, trade unions, other workers, and there is a one-day strike called, a general strike called in support of the students. And on that day, 1 million people marched through Paris in support of the students.
The joining of the student with the all-powerful unions changed French society there and then, almost overnight. The country stopped working.
France at that moment began to think, are we going to have another revolution? Because the French don't do moderation, they do revolution. And it really looked like it was about to happen. There was a great iconic picture of a young woman on the shoulders of one of the young protesters. So it gave the whole world the idea that maybe there's going to be another revolution in France, and it really actually began to look like that.
Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. Hello, I love you, won't you tell me your name? Hello, I love you, let me jump in your game. She's walking down the street, blind to...
Hello, I Love You is the Doors at the most pop. It's an amazing pop song, but, you know, because Jim Morrison was a former film studies student and, you know, an arty guy, you've got some kind of rather dissonant, slightly odd feel about it. It's like, you know, saying hello, I love you. Instantly, it's kind of something, it's a bit off.
I can't think of the Doors without thinking of my great friend Paul Rothchild, who produced those records. To me, the sound was just great. Paul did such a great job, and I never got tired of listening to those records. Just something about the combination of that dark edge to Morrison's voice and sort of moodiness of the, you know, Paul just captured that so well.
Tragedy would strike American politics once again with the assassination of presidential hopeful Bobby Kennedy on June 6th.
On June the 5th, Bobby Kennedy had just won the California primary, an amazing moment because California is such an important state in terms of the presidential election, and pretty much that would secure him as the Democratic candidate. And so he gives this huge victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago and let's win.
After he's finished his speech, his entourage decides the way to avoid the crowd is to take him through the hotel kitchens, even though his bodyguard is very dubious about this, as he doesn't think it's a good idea.
As he's going through the pantry, Sirhan, a young Palestinian, was in the pantry, came out from behind a rack and fired. Shot him once in the head, twice in the back. He never regained consciousness. He died early in the morning.
Why he shot him? There's a lot of theories. This was at the time when Robert Kennedy wanted to pull out of Vietnam. Hoover hated him. He was extremely unpopular. Kennedy, of course, was a great supporter of Martin Luther King, who'd also been assassinated. So the whole thing is a very shady and unpleasant chapter in American history.
The effects of it were almost like a tidal wave across American politics. And of course, the ultimate result of this was that the Democratic candidate for president would be Hubert Humphrey.
Bobby Kennedy was going to bring in new values, he was going to bring in change, he was charismatic, he was exciting, he was a revolutionary, and he was going to be president. And there are a lot of people who didn't want that.
How many times I've seen tears coming from your blue eyes.
Aphrodite's Child was a Greek band. They had the young Demis Roussos and Vangelis, and they were part of the whole '68 mood because they were escaping the military in Greece. And they travelled to France, they're on their way to England.
And because Paris wasn't functioning, they couldn't get visas to go further on to Britain, so they stayed in Paris. In Paris, they recorded this beautiful song, Rain and Tears, and it was heartbreaking. It was lovely, and it stayed at #1 in France for 14 weeks.
Those were the days, my friend, we thought they'd never end. We'd sing and dance forever and a day. We'd live the life we choose, we'd fight and never
Support for Alexander
lose,
Dubček,
for we were
first
young
secretary of the Communist Party, had gathered momentum from the Prague Spring.
Dubček's regime, he called it socialism with a human face. But what it really meant was slightly liberalising some of the regime's more extreme policies.
He's talking about freedom of the press, he's talking about freedom of speech, the possibility of multiple parties, importance of economic goods, consumerism, and to Moscow, this is rebellion. The Soviet Union get very concerned. They start to move their tanks closer to Czechoslovakia, and they make the Warsaw Pact, in which pretty much they agree that if they start to see anti-communism going on, plurality of government, too much freedom, they will agree together to intervene in that country.
Dubček was always loyal to the Soviet Union. He believed that they were friends. He believed that they wouldn't in a million years invade.
21st of August 1968 is when the Prague Spring was ruthlessly crushed, and 6,500 tanks and 50,000 troops came in from Russia and suppressed Dubček's opening up, and now it was firmly under the Iron Curtain.
Dubček lasted another year until 1969, when he was deposed and he became an ambassador, but of course he was never the same again.
Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine is the ultimate song of suspicion, passion and jealousy, and nobody could do it better than Marvin Gaye.
The creativity of Black America in those years, when everybody, now we look back and we talk about psychedelic this and all the Beatles and the Stones and the groups, and it's all great, but the things that stand the test of time more and more, Aretha, Otis, Marvin Gaye, Four Tops, those guys,
I Heard It Through the Grapevine is Marvin Gaye actually beginning the next phase of his musical career, in which he becomes a prophet, and which he starts to say, people wake up, something's going on in this country. We danced to it and we hopped around, but actually the tone of it is about be careful, because something's coming and it's not a good thing.
Towards the end of August, Chicago would erupt in violence as anti-war and anti-establishment demonstrations clashed with police at the Democratic Convention.
At the Democratic Convention of 1968, Robert Kennedy was meant to be there, but he'd been assassinated. So you had Hubert Humphrey and McCarthy, and there became a huge protest against it.
feelings were already running high. There had been riots, there had been a lot of demonstrations, and there were some very excitable activists, and they said they were going to do things like disrupt it.
At the time, the mayor of Chicago, Richard Daley, had said, if you kids come here with this, I'm dealing with you, I'm gonna take you out. So he had actually armed, or uber-armed, the Chicago Police Department, which had already been battling the uprisings in the Black community because Dr. King had been murdered just months before. So they were tooled up, let's put it this way.
Meanwhile, in the center of Chicago, Abbie Hoffman, who was the leader of the Yippies, had organized what he called a festival of life. And this was 10,000 people who were gathered in Lincoln Park, and they attempted to sleep there.
The Yippie movement was a kind of very politicised version of the hippie movement, so it was a sort of revolutionary wing, essentially.
What these demonstrators were saying was they hadn't got the president they wanted, they hadn't got Kennedy, but they wanted change. Things had to be different, and the young of America wanted something very different to what their parents had done.
Most of the Democratic delegates were staying at the Conrad Hilton, and that's where Abbie Hoffman and the protesters decided to launch their set-piece demonstration. This was dealt with by the police with extreme brutality.
The fact that it was so disastrous for it to be in Chicago could not have been foreseen. And the changes in society that made it disastrous were so radical and so extreme that they just boggled the mind.
They burst into the Hilton Hotel, where a lot of us were in there working on the anti-war movement. They had guns. We were totally unarmed. People would fall down on the floor to show that they were nonviolent. They just stepped on you. It was pretty horrible.
What Mayor Daley had never considered was the fact that it was going to be filmed. The television companies were all there, and they showed this brutality, this incredible behaviour by the police going out live. And this had a profound effect on American opinion.
To a lot of American people watching on TV, they hadn't seen this in such close quarters because many riots simply were not filmed by TV cameras. There were TV cameras all over the Democratic Convention because they were going there to film it anyway. So suddenly these journalists who were expecting to film rather political conversation were filming these mass pitched battles.
It really did feel apocalyptic. It was something I followed avidly, television, newspapers, what was going on, because I had people I knew there.
The Chicago 7, as they came to be known, were all arrested. And after appeals, all of them were, escaped jail, but it was very, very close.
In September, CBS debuted 2 shows that would go on to become television classics.
Hawaii Five-0 made its debut in September 1968, and this became the longest-running police series in American television history.
It's a good fun cop show, but Hawaii Five-0 is all about the music, surely.
Hawaii Five-0 had that theme song. First of all, it was that theme song with the woman doing the hula at the beginning to the theme song, so it was great.
I don't think there's ever been better theme music to a television program.
Of course, the sort of iconic phrase that ran through the whole thing that we used to say all the time, "Book 'em, Dano." Every time he finally got his man, it was "Book 'em, Dano," so we were all "Book 'em, Dano."
Book 'em, Dano.
Jack Lord was kind of a movie star-ish person on television. He had the same looks. He was kind of like Steve McQueen, and he was just so cool. Hawaii, most of us grew up in cities, and there was Hawaii with these beaches and stuff, so it was iconic.
Good evening. This is 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes was the dawn of television investigative journalism. Essentially, it was a magazine show, but it featured Vietnam. It featured police brutality, and it wasn't from a particularly left-wing position or anything. It featured issues of the day, and this really hadn't been done before.
We do think this is sort of a new approach. We realize, of course, that new approaches are not always instantly accepted.
We'll see. I'm Mike Wallace.
We will indeed.
You know, there are definitely things in British media and television that are way ahead of equivalents in America, but I think that set a kind of standard.
Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire.
Jose Feliciano was a blind Puerto Rican guitarist, and he changed Light My Fire into a lament rather than the rather swaggering version which the Doors had done. But the writer of the song, Robbie Krieger of the Doors, he loved it. He said he'd really captured what it could have been, this song.
And our love become a funeral pyre.
I used to see Jose Feliciano come into the Club 47 in Boston, the folk club there. His uncle would lead him. You know, he was blind even then. He was a teenager, and he'd play this guitar and this incredible voice, and he'd sing this amazing thing. And everybody'd be like, what was that? Wow. It's great to hear songs turned upside down and done differently. And again, it was great in those days. You could turn on the radio and just hear great music. You know, it was just at a flick of a dial.
Could you hand me a garment?
All along the Watchtower is Jimi Hendrix doing Bob Dylan better than Bob Dylan could ever do it, because Jimi Hendrix is such a brilliant guitarist, and I think a fantastic singer as well. I mean, he puts so much feeling into that song. It turns it into something incredibly exciting.
That, I have to say, is even better of a reimagination of a song than Jose Feliciano, Light My Fire. Jimi Hendrix doing All Along the Watchtower. That opening chord on the 12th string, and genius.
I think Jimi Hendrix was held in such high esteem by other musicians and other songwriters that people like Dylan were very, very pleased for him to be doing their material.
In 1968, the Summer Olympics were held in October in Mexico City. In the 200 meters, Tommie Smith won the gold and John Carlos the bronze.
At the medal presentation ceremony, at the very moment these athletes were anointed as being the best in the world, the two Americans turned up bare feet in order to represent the poverty that they saw around them. They wore beads too, and they each wore a glove. And as the medals were being presented, they raised one gloved arm each and scowled. And this was the Black Power salute at the time.
It was sensational. It really embodied everything that we young people were feeling in that year. It was an amazing thing to do. It was as strong as Take a Knee is now, but it really made people think a lot.
They are immediately chastised for this because the Olympics is meant to be apolitical, that's what they say, and so they're banned from the Olympic Village. They are very strongly criticised for this.
Initially, the athletic body didn't get behind them at all and criticised them and felt that this was the wrong thing to do. But when they came back, it was a different matter. They came back as heroes.
Tommie Smith and John Carlos, who will be remembered as this, and their careers would forever be dwarfed by this one moment. But many years later, they both said that they had no regrets whatsoever.
I think it was Tommie Smith who said that you know, if he wins the race, he's an American, not a black American. If he does something bad, they'd call him a Negro. He said, we're black and we're proud to be black.
October was a big month for film, with several classics being released within days of each other. And they didn't get much bigger than Peter Yates's Bullet.
The thing about Bullet, first of all, it was a Steve McQueen picture. The second thing that it was about was that everybody wanted a Mustang. Bullet has a scene in it that's about, I think, 10 minutes long, 12 minutes long, of the duel of these, well, there's a Mustang in it.
What it'll really be remembered for is the incredible chase scene. And what they did was that they filmed it in streets. Generally, Hollywood movies are filmed on lots and sets, and Bullitt broke that mold. And you had the famous chase scene, which is actually through the streets of San Francisco.
The whole story is about a cop and all of these things, but the iconic moment is the chase. You're in that car, you're with Steve McQueen. You don't know how this is going to end, and it is full on, and it's just gears and crashing and motors. And it was just iconic. Iconic boys movie, but I saw it too.
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Night of the Living Dead cost $114,000 to make, and it recouped $21 million. So it was a massive success.
Night of the Living Dead is the first countercultural horror movie. George A. Romero made it on next to nothing, and it's this film which is about zombies taking over, and the survivors hide out in this farmhouse.
Yeah, it looks like about 8 or 10 out there now.
It's more than there were. There are a lot out back, too.
On the surface, it was a horror film. It was certainly incredibly brutal. The violence was shocking. But also, it wasn't just a horror film. Like so much in 1968, there was stuff going on under the surface.
There are a lot of theories that he was reflecting Vietnam, and he's reflecting what was going on at the time, but also the lead is black, which is very unusual for a movie like this. It became a key moment in the counterculture, because you had horror movies were traditionally seen as trashy and silly and fun and entertaining, but not of cultural relevance. And suddenly you had this film which was actually almost a metaphor or a euphemism for what was going on in the country.
In November of 1968, the American people are suffering what you can definitely say is an identity crisis. They've seen so much police brutality, they've seen riots, they've seen shootings, the shooting of Kennedy, the shooting of Martin Luther King. They are beginning to be increasingly scared about the future. And so there starts to be this great movement towards conservative behavior.
Nixon appealed to what he called the silent majority. And this is the time of the Vietnam protests, it's the time of the hippie movement, the student movement, this flowering of kind of new consciousness. The silent majority were all those people all over America who felt very alienated from this.
He promised to boost America's nuclear capability, and effectively, he promised to take America away from the protests and the trauma of 1968.
First priority foreign policy objective of our next administration will be bring an honorable end to the war in Vietnam.
Nixon makes the promise to come out of Vietnam, and as a consequence, Nixon becomes president. So all this run-up, all this talk of liberal, all this talk of change, we now have a very conservative Republican president in power.
Change would also arrive at another of America's oldest institutions.
Yale University, the bastion of American education, didn't admit women. Now, as early as 1966, they had, in fairness to them, tried to reverse that policy. They tried to link with Vassar, the female college, but Vassar were having none of this. So in 1968, both Yale and Vassar, totally separately, agreed to take the other sex into their college. Albatross was a British #1 for the Peter Green era of Fleetwood Mac. It also went to #4 in America. And it was sort of musical balm for troubled times. It was a beautiful, slow, languid instrumental with the sounds of the seashore on it.
Suddenly you had these very, very long, beautiful, one might say ponderous guitar solos by this incredible guitarist called Peter Green, who was then leading Fleetwood Mac, and he would have terrible mental health problems that would force him to leave. But at this stage, he was turning Fleetwood Mac, who'd been around for quite a long time, into this big blues phenomenon.
Once Upon a Time in the West is a great film.
This is Henry Fonda as the star of this movie.
Sergio Leone, who'd done the Unknown Man trilogy with Clint Eastwood, thought he'd had it with Westerns, but then he was given the opportunity to direct Henry Fonda as a villain. So he took his chance, did it, and the results were absolutely brilliant.
It had a kind of very, very elegant feel, and it changed Westerns. It was almost like an existentialist Western.
It was a landmark in every way, and the theme song was epic.
On Christmas Eve of 1968, the Apollo 8, a program that had been begun by President Kennedy, goes into the orbit of the moon, goes round the moon, and what it gets are these amazing pictures.
The Earth from here is a grand oasis of the big vastness of space.
We've never seen Earth like this before. So it was a breakthrough, not just in exploration of the moon, and, you know, of course it wouldn't be long before man would land on the moon, but also of actually seeing our Earth from space.
Right, you're all looking at yourselves as seen from 180,000 miles out in space.
The crew actually read some Genesis while they're up there in the shuttle. Very interesting moment. On one hand, it is the ultimate representation of American power. They have sent men round the moon taking photos, but also it shows us how teeny tiny Earth is, how just a small place it is. And so on one hand, we're the greatest and the smallest in the universe.
After such a year of turmoil, I think it's quite significant that Time magazine had as its Men of the Year the three-man crew of Apollo 8. These were incredibly brave men. This was the first time a manned aircraft had gone out of the Earth's orbit. It's the first time that anyone had seen the dark side of the moon.
For once in my life, I have someone who needs me, someone I've needed so long.
Once in My Life, it just makes you love Stevie Wonder, really. It's just so happy, and there's something about Stevie Wonder that just lifts you up, and For Once in My Life is a great example of that.
This is I call it his Broadway song. Gene Kelly could have sang this song, and that's the genius of it, because Stevie does it, and he does it magnificently.
For Once in My Life is a very optimistic way to close 1968. It was full of light and full of joy. And like Apollo 8, it showed that 1968 need not end with the despair and disappointment and violence that had characterised the year.
I know won't desert me. I'm not alone.